Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasr, and this is the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group. Tonight's topic is going to be on SQL Server Reporting Services 2017. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, the group is free of charge and open to the public. Meetings occur every month, typically every fourth Thursday, and we discuss anything and everything related to .NET. And naturally, since reporting services is related to .NET, it is one of the topics that we cover. You can find all the meetup information on meetup.com. Search for the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group, and you'll find past meeting info as well as future meeting information. In addition, every meeting, take a look in the comments section. There'll be links to events as well as the recording of that presentation. I'd also like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, Tech Systems for sponsoring the space, iNido for sponsoring the pizza and the drinks over in the corner, PostSharp for sponsoring the PostSharp license, and NIS Technologies for the web hosting. So the Wi-Fi, ROC 3001 is the password, and it's ROC 3, either the 2.5 gigahertz or the non-2.5 gigahertz. The password for both is ROC 3001. Restrooms, if needed, are straight down the hallway on the right-hand side. And also keep in mind that despite the auditorium-style seating, we like to keep it as much of a roundtable discussion as much as possible. So feel free to jump in with questions or comments at any point in time. And last but not least, if you would please mute your cell phones. A little bit about me. Been a software developer since 1995. Started a small organization called NIS Technologies where we do consulting and training. And I've been certified with a few certifications from Microsoft. Also run this user group as well as the .NET study group, which meets online. And you can also find the meeting information for that on meetup.com as well. I've authored a few articles for Visual Studio Magazine, and I've been Microsoft MVP since 2013. So diving into tonight's presentation, some of the features that are in 2017. Basically, we're going to look at the SQL Server development tools that are going to be in Visual Studio, the web portal and all the features that come with it, as well as we're going to look at the APIs that are newly introduced with 2017. And lastly, we're going to look at the mobile report builder. So once you install SQL Server 2017, the key thing is you need to get the report server configuration manager up and running and configured correctly. More specifically, if I go over to my desktop and I spin that up, so I'm prompted to connect to the report server instance. And once I connect to that, this is the configuration manager where I can configure what the report server is going to be running under, what account, and what URL. So if I ever forget what URL that I need to be pointing to, simply go to the configuration manager. And as you see here, it happens from time to time, depending on if you install patches or if your machine was brought down with a hard shutdown. Sometimes the servers or the service will stop. And so I need to go here. And once I start it up, you'll notice that all these tabs will then take on color on the left-hand side. And of course, because it's a presentation, it's not working as expected. There we go. So now when I go over into my web service URL, there it has the URL for the web service itself. And then for the portal, it's a very similar URL. It has the machine name, and it's pointing to the reports, whereas the web service itself is pointing to report server. And we'll make reference to those later. But for me to reference the report server, I just simply click the link, and it will take me there. And there is the new web portal that was offered with 2017. So I have the web portal, I configured it, it's up and running. Now the next thing that I need to do is to actually create a report. So to do that, I installed SQL Server development tools within Visual Studio, and with that it installs the templates. So when I click on File, New, pardon the jumping mouse, File, New Project. Typically, I go under Visual C# to look up for my different application templates. For reporting services, it's going to be located under Business Intelligence. And in that, I want to select the Report Server project. I'm going to select the demo folder, and then we'll give it a name. So we'll just call it the Report Project 3, and then go ahead and start that up. How many of you have worked with reporting services in the past? Okay, which versions? 2017, 16, 2012, okay. So you'll see that between 2012 and 2017, there are some similarities, but at the same time, some differences as far as creating a basic report. So creating a basic template essentially creates a project in Visual Studio, and now I see that I have a reports folder. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to create an empty report underneath it. I'm going to call it report3.rdl. Select Add. Now, once I create a report, obviously I need to create a data connection and I need to create a data set. So I go to under my data sources and I select Add Data Source. And then I'm going to give it a name. Now you notice here that it's giving me the option to make it an embedded connection or as a shared data source. If I select embedded connection, essentially that connection string is going to be embedded inside the RDL or the report itself. As the name suggests, it's embedded. And so the SQL connection type is SQL Server. And now for my connection string, I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to cut and paste a connection string that I previously created. So this is pointing to my AdventureWorks database on the local instance that I have. Now that the data source is created, I'm going to add a data set. And then once again, for that, I'm going to go into my notes, and I have a query that's really doing nothing more than querying a few fields from AdventureWorks 2017. I'm going to select that it's an embedded data set in my report. I'm going to choose the data source. Now here I can choose either text or a store procedure. In my case, I'm going to select text because I want a query to actually be embedded inside of my report. And I'll go ahead and click OK, and you'll see that I have an error message. So it's saying unable to connect to data source 1. If I look at the details of that, and this is a gotcha, and I did this intentionally. Once I select data source properties, you'll see that my SQL Server authentication is set. Instead, I should have chosen Windows authentication. In addition, you'll notice that the server instance here, let's pull up the magnifier. The naming mechanism that I used for my server name is NIS 110/SQL Express. If I enter that as is in my connection string, I'm going to end up with a problem, an error more specifically. So to help remedy that, I actually need to have an escape character or a slash so that NIS 110/SQL Express needs to be stated as //. So the slash is an escape character or requires an escape character in the name. Otherwise, you could run into problems. The reason I mention this, I got bit by this issue on a deployment where the production servers had the slashes in the name, but the QA servers did not. So naturally, everything worked great in QA, migrated to production, and that's where things went wrong. So just wanted to point that out as a gotcha. If you have a slash in the name, you always want to specify the escape character of a slash before it. So now that I have that all set, I'll click OK, and then go back to my data set. And now I have my data set all set. Still unable to connect. Why is that? I'm sorry? So I have integrated security here, and we'll do an edit, SQL Server authentication, AdventureWorks, test connection, that worked. Okay, okay. And then if we go over here, query designer, and success. So I guess I forgot to hit OK on that last instance. In any case, so now I have a data source that's defined and a data set where I actually went out, queried specific fields from the database using the data source that I specified previously. Now I have some fields that I can click and drag onto my designer pane. So now I'll go ahead and click and drag some fields. Actually, I need to go over into my toolbox. I'm going to grab a table control, pull it here, and then I'm going to go back into my report designer, and then I'm going to click and drag fields from the data set onto the design surface and where I want them to appear. Okay, and that's good for now. I just want to create a basic report that I can actually create and deploy. So now I have all my fields specified. I'll go ahead and click Start. Not only is it building the report, but you'll see in a second that it's actually deploying it to the server. And that'll appear in the output window in just a second. It's always thrilling watching that little blue donut spin around, isn't it? So you'll see over on the lower portion a minute ago, here it is, it says deploy started. We have the build complete, and it should be spinning up the report. Michael, you had a question? What else would you expect, right? 0 errors, 0 warnings. And we see that Visual Studio is hung up a little bit. Even though 16 kilobytes is all you need, right? And there's the message deploying to localhost report server, and voila, it's pointing to the report server. So now when I click the report, it'll actually execute, and here are the contents. There we go. Okay, so now I have a working report built within SQL Server development tools, or Visual Studio in other words, and was able to create a data source, the data set, and then by clicking play, it essentially deployed it out to the server, and it ran it there. So now if I go over into my report3.rdl, if I actually go out to that folder, we see that there's a report3.rdl, And then what we want to do here is open it up, and we'll use something very simplistic like Notepad. And we see that everything in here is embedded. So here's my connection string embedded, and there is my command text. There's my select statement, all embedded within the report. And then I have the field specified. Here's the date, the order, and subcategory. So this is the RDL file that I just created in Visual Studio. Okay. Essentially, it's XML format, and because I chose to embed the data source as well as the data set in it, it included the connection string as well as the query for executing against that database. Okay. So it's all XML, everything's embedded in one file in this case. If you notice, there were two options. There was the embedded and there was the shared. I opted for the embedded. If you use a shared, then you can have one connection that's shared by the entire team, and they could write the report against that. Not to mention it would provide an extra layer of security, because now I no longer see this plain text connection string in my RDL, but rather it's a shared connection that I'm using.
Is that XML embedding the query, is that a new feature, or is this something that's been passed through the XML?
The embedded? Is the query embedded in there? I don't know if it was in previous versions. They didn't advertise it as a new feature, so I'd imagine it is. It's been around for a while. Yeah, it's in older versions from someone who used a previous version. Okay. So now that we have the report, we deployed it out to the server. Let's take a look at our web portal. And we see that I have created some other projects previously. And here's my report project 3 folder that I just created. And there's my report 3 that I uploaded just by simply pressing the play button on Visual Studio. So it got deployed out to the server, and I'm able to scroll through it. So some of the features that are within the web portal. This was introduced in 2016 with a little bit of modifications in 2017. So once I have the web portal open, what I can do is I can go back to my report project folder, and you see here that I have the option to create new items. I can upload new items or other files, and I can manage the folders. But let's say that I wanted to take away access to this menu bar. To do that, I could go and open up the instance for reporting services. So what I have open currently is my SQL Express database. What I'm going to do is create a new connection, and I'm going to browse, and I'm going to go to reporting services, not the database engine, and there is my reporting instance under NIS 110. I'll open that up. Once I'm connected here, I'm going to right click on it and select properties, and then under advanced, I should see the menu item show download menu. That's not the one. There is this connection.
Question about that upload feature. Is that uploaded? Where's reference to that file being stored? Is it a secondary database being created as a result of this?
So we'll get to that one in just a second. Thought this was set to true. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening, but that menu option should have taken it away.
Can you click on the ellipses on report 3?
ellipses on report 3. So this is the basic menu where I can make some modifications, manage.
I thought it was going to hide download from there. That's what I was wondering.
No, it was this menu bar that it's supposed to hide. And I'm not sure what's going on. I'm sorry?
Do you have to restart the server?
No, when I tried it yesterday, just a refresh and everything worked fine. So expect it when you least expect it. Yeah, pretty surprised by that. I'll have to take a closer look at it. In addition, within the menu, if we go back to our portal, we see that we have two options. I have my home page, which essentially has all my reports, my folders, and everything's categorized per the items that I can create here, either folders, KPIs, mobile reports, data sets, and data sources. This resource file, or subscriber.sql, this was a file that I uploaded using this upload link. And there I was simply able to upload an SQL file as well as you could upload any other file type to store it on the server. As far as each individual element, you see that we have an ellipsis here, and essentially just allows you to manage it down to a specific level. You can either move it to another folder, you can manage the settings, and obviously every object is going to have its own different settings. So here for the mobile reports, I can specify which shared data set to use and any security settings that I want to implement on it. So once you're in the Browse tab, you're essentially able to see everything that's available on the server. When you click on Favorites, now it's tied to only items that I had selected as my favorites. Think of it as your own bookmarks. Okay? So these items, the KPI and the report, they're also available under the Browse menu or the Browse tab of the reporting server. Okay? Any questions so far?
Yeah, where is all the data from the server base being stored? Is it there's a secondary table and then there's just in the content
Oh, sorry.
behind? It's not using the same database you're writing a report for, right?
I'm sorry?
It's not using the same database you're writing a report from.
No, it's stored separately. So for that project, so it's hosted within this web server. Where am I? We want to go over into Configuration Manager. So this web service that's running, that's where everything is hosted in there.
So it's just cached?
And you have I'm sorry?
Is it the data is cached?
It can be, depending on the settings that you choose. It can be cached, and you can also specify the intervals of when the cache expires, or you could opt for the latest data. To answer your question, Michael, in more detail, here we have under Configuration Manager, it's pointing to NIS 110, Report Server 2017, and let me pull up the magnifier. So there are all my settings for my report server. Okay? And if you notice report server mode, it's running as native. In previous versions, we had the option of either native or SharePoint integrated. Now it's just native when you install it. You don't have the option for SharePoint integration. That's not to say SharePoint integration with reports has went away, but there's other means for deploying it. And likewise, here I specify the service account and the password for running that service, where everything's going to be stored for the report server. Can you see it? Obviously, you can't see the password, but let me show you what I'm referring to. So here is where it's specifying the database for the report server. And then right below it are the credentials for accessing that database. In this case, it's the service account that's being used. Okay, any other questions? So once I'm in the Browse tab, now I can actually select additional items to create. And you'll see that obviously other than folders and reports, I can also create KPIs. And the whole point of KPIs as a key performance indicator is basically telling you whether something needs your attention immediately, something that's going to need attention in the near future, or everything is good. So red, yellow, or green type statuses. So you can set them up to point to a specific field. The gotcha here is you can have it query from a data set, but it's only going to be looking only at the first row in that data set. So take a look at my example. Let me go back here. Here's a KPI that I created earlier. So here I specified that it's going to be a field from a data set as opposed to setting it manually. And I want to look at the max total sales. And just to give you an idea, this is the query that I ran. Let's close that. Copy. So this is the query that I ran, and it's querying from the AdventureWorks database. Once I execute it, it's giving me back some values, and you notice there's 12,000 plus rows here. Actually, I take that back. That is a different record set that I'm using. So let's go back to my portal. So here is the dataset field, and we'll see that it's retrieving it from max sales. If I don't know what max sales is, I clicked on the ellipses next to it, and now it's going to give me the entire data set, and it's going to allow me to select which field I want to use for my KPI. Another gotcha is when I select total due, you notice the value here is 309,7448. Okay? However, when I look at my KPI, see now it refreshed. Before, anyone remember what the value was before? It was about 1 million something. So that's another issue is with the cache with the KPIs. I had it set to use the latest. And let's go to So it's using the field from the max sales, which is a data set. When I go over into my data sets, and that is in sales order, there's my max sales data set. And if you notice caching, I have it set to always run this data set with the most recent data. So if I have a KPI and it's using a data set that uses the latest data, why is it still showing outdated data? Because it's a gotcha in SQL Server. So essentially what you got to do is set the cache to expire. If you need it to be the most recent and you always need it to cache constantly, you would need to set this expiration to 1 minute.
Let's set it to 0 and see what happens.
Well, I had other issues with the caching, so I'm not going to play around with it just yet. But in any case, so that's the gotcha there, is that the KPI, even though you have it set to always run with the most recent data, it still does not. It only updated when I went to update that field. So going back into KPIs, and you see there's the value again, back to 1 million. When I select to manage that KPI, again, a KPI is really nothing more than an indicator. It's a flag to let you know something needs your immediate attention, something is going to require attention in the near future, or everything is good. So I can format it depending on what the field value is. Likewise, I can also set the value of what I want it to be, meaning I can set it manually. I can create a manual KPI where someone will go in there and change the value manually, or I can have it read from a data set. And in this case, I chose a data set field. Once you select the data set field, you'll notice there's an ellipsis next to it. And then there it pops up the data set that it's pointing to, which is the max sales data set. And then from there, I can decide to pick whichever value I want to pick. And in this case, it is the total due. And you'll see the value now is 3,097,448. Select OK, and now the value gets updated. A little quirky, I know. Likewise, you can also set the goal of where you want it to be. So depending on the goals, meaning where do I need my KPI to be? If I need to have sales always over 3 million, then naturally that's the value that I'm going to set. And if you notice here, I set it manually. Again, I can specify a data set field, and I can point it to another field in another data set so that it compares it constantly. Yes, sir. I'm sorry? Control plus on my keyboard. You want to zoom in? And so once I click the ellipses here, now it's asking me choose a data set. And I know that I have a data set in my sales order folder, and it's called max sales. And then from there, I can select what type of aggregation I want. So I can select average, and we can go to total due. Or I can set it to manually and then just specify a value of, again, we'll just leave it at 3 million and click apply. Okay, so once you do that, then if you go over into the portal, you'll have a KPI with an indication of where you're at for that measure. In this case, we're monitoring our total due for the revenue being generated. Okay, so you could have this for average number of orders. You could have it for average amount of orders and just constantly monitor sales on that website or your sales period through the web portal. Make sense? Right. So that's the whole point of a KPI. And it, again, the thing that I like to sell clients on is looking at it from a distance. You can tell just by the color scheme if something needs your attention or not. If something's red, obviously it's telling you attention is needed here. If it's yellow, it's borderline, and if it's green, all systems are go. Okay? The other thing is, going back to my reports, another new feature that was added in 2017 is now that I have my report up, I can actually put in a comment. And you'll see here that there was previous comments that were entered, and it says this comment was entered February 27th, 2019. In addition, I can actually upload files to be attached to it. So I can attach a file, and let's say for kicks, I'm going to include this image as well. And when I post my comment, now I have my image as well as the comment maintained in history along with that report. Okay?
Does that comment history go away if you re-release the report?
As you re-release it, so if I was to go back into Visual Studio and publish it over again, I believe so, but I'd have to look into it.
You set conditions on any of this, too? You have your sales manager who doesn't want people deleting comments, and you have your
So with the menu bar, it should do away with that. You can restrict security for that. But again, as you've seen earlier, I had a little bit of an issue with that. So once you do away with the menu bar, obviously you won't be able to add in a comment.
More granular control too, right?
To a degree. So going into the report, as far as granular control, you have the ability to control the data source, where it's coming from, subscriptions, everyone's favorite, caching, how often you want the data to be updated, and of course security, who can actually see the report.
You can control what type of formats the downloads.
Right, so that's another thing that I was going to mention.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you look at reports, again, running my report, now I can select the Save As, and then you'll notice that, and let me zoom in a little bit, you'll notice that when I click the Save, I now have the option to save it as Word, Excel. PowerPoint is the new addition. Word and Excel have been around. I can also save it as a PDF, a TIFF, Web Archive, CSV, XML, or create a data feed out of it. I'm sorry? So that will essentially create it as a data source that others can read from.
connection string and everything?
I'm sorry?
With the connection string, or just an access to the report itself?
Depending on where you put it, then obviously the connection string would be needed there. You'd have to point to it somehow. Todd, you had a question?
But you can restrict which of those options are available for that particular report.
As far as the downloads,
Yeah, like I only want them to be able to download it in an Excel format.
I didn't see that available. Why would you want to do that, though?
Because you only want them to download it in Excel format.
So in that case, oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry. Yeah, so in that case, you can just publish the PDF and just put it out on the server in the same fashion that I was able to upload this file down here. So you'd create the report as a PDF, publish it to the report server, and then you'd have a PDF sitting under your resources here. And so that way they can't actually run the report per se, they could just see the results. Make sense?
I can't find the manual, or I found configuration things for hiding the
So the menu is primarily for this menu bar up here for the new, the upload, manage, and tiles. That's the one that I was playing with earlier. Why is it not working now? I'd have to look into it a little bit further.
You can add toolbar, alt to the URL.
Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't think of that. Yeah, you're right. There was another question, Schubert.
Does it have a feature to compare each cache and KPI that's changed?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Does it have a feature to compare what changed in each cache?
So when you run the KPI, it's actually going against the data set, right? So in our case, we have it going against this max sales data set. And in that data set, here I can specify the caching options. In my case, I said always run this data set with the most recent data. However, I know that that is a bug, that it doesn't do that. So the other option is to set your caching to expire more frequently. In other words, set it to expire every 1 minute, for example. Okay?
Is there a way to compare the different caches?
I'm sorry?
Is there a way to compare the different caches that you have if you have more than one?
If you have more than one cache for the data set,
Storing more than one KPI, can you compare multiple?
well, every KPI will be running against the data set. So you control cache on the data set, not the KPI. Dave, you were saying?
No, you mentioned that's just going to be the first row.
Right,
It's just going to be the first row that's resulting in trends.
right. And that query is this data set that it's pointing to. And again, it's that query that I also set the caching on, not the KPI itself. Okay? Make sense or thoroughly confusing?
Yes.
Okay.
I think you're trying to ask, is there a way to see something change over time?
Change over time, that's the first question. The secondary question to that is, you can see change over time. How easily hackable is this, so that you could add custom features, functionality? Or am I off in space when it's actual, with what its actual usage is done for?
Okay, so as far as, let's go back to the KPI. Going back here. So down here, this trend, you can have it set so that it reads from a specific field, and it will constantly record the changes for that field. Okay, and it'll record those values.
So you can see changes over time with the trend?
For that KPI, yes. Okay, now what was your other question?
So if I wanted to add 2 more forms here, 2 more fields for forms, to be able to access the data differently, how easily hackable or accessible is it for me to take this reporting tool as a package, write some code that allows me to enter the forms and change them?
So let me just jump ahead real quick to the URLs. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about later is the APIs that are available. There may be one available for adding in KPIs, but I don't think so. But just to be thorough, yeah, there is none. And I'll touch on this a little bit later. This is basically a set of APIs that have been introduced with 2017. There are RESTful APIs that allow you to basically query caching plans, data sets, data sources, everything that you have in your report server will make it queryable via these REST APIs. But that's coming up a little bit further. So to answer, the short answer to your question, can we customize the KPIs? No. Any other questions regarding KPIs or reports or anything we talked about so far? All good? All right, onwards and upwards. Okay, so branding. So naturally, you can just guess that if you were to upload this or show this to your managers, especially marketing folks, the first thing they're going to say is, can we add our company logo on here? Do we have to see this SQL Server Reporting Services logo all the time? And the answer is yes. So it allows for branding, and for that we can go to the site settings. And then here you'll notice that there's a branding tab. And now I can upload a brand. What the brand is essentially a .zip. And this is one that I downloaded. And this is the generic AdventureWorks branding. So it's a zip file. Once you unzip it, well, first of all, let me just upload it first. And you'll see immediately the changes will take place. Ooh, right? We now have that pretty green with the AdventureWorks logo and the colors. Now, going back into what I actually uploaded, we'll see that we have this AW branding package. When I unzipped it, essentially contains 3 files. There's the metadata.xml, a color.json file, and the AW logo.jpg. So the logo is self-explanatory. It's just a logo. When I look at the JSON file, let's open it through Visual Studio. When I look at my JSON file, my color.json specifically, as the name suggests, it's a JSON file, and it contains a setting for all the different colors. Okay? When I look at my metadata file, .xml, that's essentially an XML file that references all the other resources that it's going to be utilizing. So here inside of my metadata.xml, there's a reference to my colors.json as well as my JPEG file that I'm using. So I upload everything as a .zip, and then it automatically unzips it and puts everything in place, rendering it immediately. And of course, after you make that change, what do most marketing folks say? No, we don't like that, right? Take it away. So now you can just simply click remove, and we're back to the standard color scheme. Okay, so we talked about the KPIs, the branding portal. Let's take a look at the APIs. So, as I had mentioned previously, in 2017, there's a new set of REST APIs that have been released. Actually, it's quite a hefty set of REST APIs. The full documentation is available on Swagger Hub, and you have things, or you have calls that allow you to query via REST APIs the cache refresh plans, catalog items, data sets, data sources, extensions, favorite items, folders, KPIs. Essentially, it's giving you your eyes and ears to what's going on the portal. So you can query everything through a URL. We're not going to go through all of these, but just touch on a couple. So for example, if we want to see what catalog items we have, I'm going to cut and paste this directly into the browser, and it will return JSON. And so here it's giving me a listing of everything that's on the catalog. My data source, my connection strings, the KPI that I created, so on and so forth. If I query it specifically for data sets, whoops. It comes back with the data set value that I created. So here we see only one item for the data set that I have. The name of it is max sales. Description is null. This shows the path that it's created in, the type, the user that modified it, and so on and so forth. So if needed, I can query and find out everything that's happening on the portal, everything that's placed there, all through REST API calls. Now, obviously, I did this through a web browser, but typically you would use something like, you can use Fiddler to actually query it. You can also use Postman, but ideally you'd want to be putting this into an application and then parsing the results when you get it back. The point is, there's a ton of API calls, and they all produce JSON as a result of what's on the portal. Okay? Any questions? So, as stated in the documentation, and I love how they put it in such tiny font here. So the base URL for this is essentially the name of your server /reports API v2. And as we see here, I have the name of my server, which is NIS 110 /reports API /v2.0, and then the call that I wanted to make. Naturally, because I'm going through the browser for this, all the calls that I selected were GET calls. So if I'm using a post, I would need a more robust tool to actually post data to the APIs. Make sense? The last thing I'm going to cover is the mobile report builder. And with that, you can create a report, and I actually created one already. And let's reduce this back to normal. And if we go over into the browse, we see that we have a mobile report created. So for mobile report, I have a mobile report publisher that I downloaded. And what I'm going to be doing there is just simply creating a report. With a mobile report builder, it gives you the option to actually see what it's going to look like depending on the size of the device that you have, whether it's a tablet or a cell phone. And so here, just creating a sample report, I'm going to select first the item that I want to utilize. So I'm going to select a totals chart, drag it onto my design surface, and then expand it to the rows and columns that I want it to appear in. And then from here, I'm going to add data to it. So when you initially create anything in remote or in the mobile report publisher, it gives you a set of abstract data. So this data is meaningless. It's just there to populate it so you can query against it. And hence you see in the tab name, simulated table. What I'm going to do is I actually need to query it against my data set. So I'm going to select the Add Data button. I'm going to either go to Excel or Report Server. And in this case, I'm going to select Report Server. And in here, I know under my sales order, I have a max sales data set. I'm going to select that. And so down here in my totals chart, do I want to work off of the simulated table or the max sales? So naturally I selected the max sales. And then here are the fields that I want to select from my max sales. I'm going to select subtotal, tax amount, total due. I'm going to uncheck purchase order ID. And now for this control, since it's specifying only one value for those items, it's going to ask me to aggregate it. Do I want to specify the sum, min, max? I'm going to go ahead and select average and done. And now when I go over into my preview, there it's going to give me for the 3 fields that I have in my data set. Now, once I do that, if I'm satisfied with the data, now I can decide what the format is of how I want it to appear. So I can select layout, And in here, I can select, right now it's set to master. If I change it to tablet, you'll see that it's more of a portrait view. If I select a phone, you'll see that it's even smaller of a portrait view. So it helps me to size the columns and the items on here. Okay. So now I have a better idea of what it's actually going to look like once I run it on my mobile device. Once I do that, and I'm satisfied with it, I'm going to select Save Mobile Report, and I can even save it to the file system or publish it out to the server. And let's call this V2. Now if I go out into my server and refresh, that's not it. Yeah, we saw it, but... And so it gives you an emulator here. I'm not sure why it's not uploading. NIS 110 reports. NIS 110 reports. I would assume it's a caching issue. But the bottom line is you have a report builder that's used specifically for mobile. And as you had seen, you can change the size from a tablet to a mobile device. Again, just to give you an idea of once you add the controls on there, what it's going to look like. Okay? Yes, sir.
So does that mobile report publisher, does that come with reporting services, or is that a separate product?
It's a separate product, but it's a free download essentially. And same thing with Report Builder as well, versus the SSDT, SQL Server Development Tools, that sits in Visual Studio. So you also have a Report Builder that is not as robust as SSDT, but again, it still accomplishes a similar task. You had a question? Someone over there had a question. Sure, go ahead.
So the reports that reporting services generates, though, are those responsive? So in other words, if I do show them on a different form factor device, I mean, will they kind of automatically go from portrait to landscape, or do I have to use the mobile reporting feature to get it to do that?
Well, let's take a look at the published reports that we have first. So we have Report Project 1. So these are paginated reports, and once I alter the size, you'll see that they don't scale very well.
Yeah.
Okay.
This question actually ties into mine. So let's say I have a client and they love this, but they want to do so much more using this platform. And that means I'm going to have to go in and edit the files that are running this report system.
Okay.
How easily can that be done?
So when you say you want to do so much more than what you'd already seen, What is exactly are you looking for?
So let's say they want to add CRUD functionality maybe, or maybe they want to add additional forms.
Okay,
You know, they want to add a footer that says their copyright.
okay.
So this is actually, there's files behind it sitting in sunburst, right?
Right, so here, in order for me to create a report, it was basically done through Visual Studio. And it was, if you recall, I have my report designer here. So yes, I can add footers, I can add headers in here, not a problem. If you're looking to, for mobile reports, for example, if you're looking to add in another control, you certainly can do that. You just shrink this down. But when you say another form, what are you referring to?
So this application itself, where does this lie?
Which application? Mobile reports or
The SSL reporting tool, where does that lie?
the SS reporting tool?
It's making connections to a database server.
Are you referring to this pane?
No.
Which one are you referring to?
The website, the web application that runs the reporting, this web application.
As in this guy? Okay, so this is running on a web server, and in my case, it's running on my local machine, and there you see it's pointing to my machine name. I'm not answering your question.
The report server database, right?
Well, right, yeah, I understand that, I'm saying to you, it's a .NET file, right, that runs this page right here, you see this interface, right?
Yeah,
Well, it probably is, but you don't have access to that to modify it.
That's the question, I want to modify
well,
this
what,
application.
okay, again, let's take it one step at a time. What are you looking to modify here? You want to add in another report, a form that you want to fill out,
I want to do more than what the interface is offering.
such as,
A footer, CRUD functionality,
oh, a footer on the page. A footer on this web page, you mean?
maybe I want to add more menu items, maybe,
Okay, so that would tie in with the branding when you would upload it.
so
You can specify it there.
do you know where this actual application lies?
So this actual application, if you go to Configuration Manager,
Maybe approaching this from another angle. Each of these reports is accessible via URLs. Each report individually.
correct.
Create your own website that offers all the functionality that you're asking for.
Yeah, I can create a web application that does just this, right? So there's a web application behind this that drives its reporting tool. And that's what I'm curious of to what, because that lies somewhere, it doesn't, you're just not looking at a database, you're looking at the whole application.
Right.
You don't have access to change that web application if you publish it or anything like that.
Okay, so it's one you're locked out from really doing anything.
But since everything's accessible.
Again, to a degree, I mean, it depends on what you want to do.
Well, there's third-party tools, right? Third-party software vendors create tools to plug into this.
There are extensions that are offered. There is ways to tweak the look and feel as far as the branding goes. So there is some flexibility there. Do you have full control over it? I would not say so. But there is some leeway there. That's why I was digging deeper to exactly what you wanted to do.
Yeah, I'm thinking, so I really think, okay, so I guess extension is the process, right? You want to create an extension and add additional features and functionality. How would I go about doing that?
Again, depending on what you want the extension to do. So you can create extensions. I can pull up the documentation for you a little bit later
Yeah,
on doing that.
I'm just curious.
Right. Yeah, the bottom line is you have some flexibility. There's some leeway there, but it's not, the gate's wide open, do what you wish.
It's not C sharp.
It probably is under the covers,
Yeah,
but how to get to that?
it's not a general purpose.
Let me put you this way. You can probably find a way to reverse engineer it. The question is, would you want to run with it afterwards? No, I would not.
Right, and that would be the point of the sweater. You can create all your stuff and then design it and you just access it by running all the polls and
Yeah.
We can talk more about it over at Slyman's.
By the way, with the menu bar, I forget where the property was located. Were you on the SSRS instance?
Yes.
Okay.
So I was over here, SSRS instance, right-click Properties, and it was under Advanced. Yeah. Again, it didn't work as expected. No matter how much you rehearse and prep, there's always a curveball. So I apologize for that.
Saw a couple knuckle ones.
That too. Okay?
Do you have to stop the server for those to take effect?
No. Any other questions?
Is this the cat's giveaway time now?
We're getting there.
I'm going to bingo next one.
But before we get there, any other questions though? And we need to go back to the PowerPoint. So, a couple gotchas. Again, just to reiterate on some of the things we mentioned earlier with KPIs. Even though you have the data set to refresh or bring the newest data back, it doesn't work as expected with KPIs. So you have to go and set the caching to expire after a certain number of minutes. Also, what's another gotcha that we talked about earlier? There's no way to compare the data? Actually, there is. How do we do that? So what happens is, you're right, that is a gotcha. So even though it's bringing back multiple rows, it's still looking only at the first value for that column that I specified. Okay? I'm sorry?
Unless you select that trend line.
Well, the trend line will select all the variations that have transpired, but it's still looking at that first row of that cell that you specified. Michael,
It's available on GitHub.
what is?
Reporting services, yes. Yes, this which will show is available on GitHub.
Reporting services?
Yeah, Microsoft Reporting Services follows Microsoft.
You mean extensions?
No, the full repository. Which that's what I figured. I mean, how are you doing extension and development if you don't have access? And those files lie somewhere on the server.
Well, extensions have been available without having the source code for the underlying foundation. In any case, not to get off target, there are extensions available. Yeah. What's another gotcha that we talked about earlier?
Slash, encoding the double slash.
Right. So if your prod environment has a slash in it, make sure your QA environment is named the same way so you're testing things accordingly. If you have that slash, you need to specify an escape character. What else? Aside from gotchas, what else did we learn today? This is the part where I get to ask you questions. You learned what a KPI was, and still is, right? And what is a KPI? And it tells us what?
Like where you are with the goal that you set.
Correct. And it tells me if something needs attention, or if it needs immediate attention in the near future, or everything is good. I can specify the KPIs and I can create them in the web portal. I can also embed them in my reports as well. What else did we learn?
Customize it for fonts or
The branding? Right, so the look and feel, the font, the colors, the images, and what do I do to customize the branding? I create a zip file that contains what? Contains the JSON file, the images, and the metadata.xml. What format is the metadata.xml in? Just making sure you're still awake. Very good. XML. Right. Okay. What else did we cover? Some of the newer features is that now we can actually export a report to PowerPoint. What are some of the other formats we can export reports to? CSV, Excel, PDF, PowerPoint, data feed. Okay. What can you tell me about comments? I can add attachments to a comment and upload them. I'm sorry. We're not sure if they stay there. We can try that afterwards, yes. I'm sorry? Someone can log in and delete all the comments?
I don't know if I can, if that can happen.
There's probably a way around it. Okay. What's another new feature that's introduced in 2017? Taylor. Just want to make sure you're paying attention. A new feature. I'm sorry? Mobile report builder. Okay. What else? That was actually in 2016, but obviously it carries over. But that's fine. What else? 3 letters. APIs. So in prior versions, we had SOAP services. Now we have RESTful APIs available. Here are some resources available. The docs.microsoft, they did a great job of documenting some of the newer features. All the REST APIs can be found on swaggerhub.com, and there's the link available for it. What is the base URL when I'm referencing my APIs on my server? Localhost / some string. That's specific enough. API v2.0 / whatever the REST API call is. Okay? And you can find that, if you ever forget, you can find that in very small font over on the Swagger Hub page. There it is. And this is the page being magnified. So if I go back down to normal size, you'll see that it just blends in very easily with the rest of the text. It took me a while to figure out why my REST API calls weren't working. That's why.
So this actually, the API actually does everything that I was asking. Swagger Hub.
As far as the customization of the site, it was more of,
As far as correct functionality, accessibility to data,
right, but adding in different forms was not on there though. In any case, in addition, you also have links to tutorials down at the bottom. Also, if needed, if you're interested in training, there's a course being built around this. Feel free to reach out to me. And you can also find a complete set of courses on nistechnologies.com. And last but not least, my contact information, snasr@nistechnologies.com, or you can find me on Twitter at samnasr, and I also invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So if there are no other questions, I would ask you to fill out the evals and pass them to the center of the room, please. Any upcoming events? Yes, got that coming in. No pun intended.
the GitHub that has a TypeScript example.
Right. The guy having both TypeScript as well as PowerScript.
That's right. Are the tickets sold out already?
Don't know. We're going to check in just a second. Saturday.com.